Whoa! With friends like these, who needs enemies? Although, to be honest, Xavier and Magneto have always been frenemies. And in an episode chock full of incredible lines, the winner has got to be Magneto telling Xavier to shut up. Now, some of you might be like, how is that the best line, Grace? And I understand where you're coming from. You know, just when it comes to zings and like, yeah, you know, get her, Jade. That's what I would like to reference. But I think the reason that is my favorite line, why I think it's the winner, is because it's almost the thesis statement of the episode, where, you know, Xavier calls out, I was going to say it later in my breakdown, but I have to defend my choice of best line. Xavier tells Magneto that he's all reaction, basically. And by telling Xavier to shut up in response, not only is he saying what he's always wanted to, but Magneto is saying, well, you're all talk, basically. So I thought they both pegged each other pretty good. All right, so Deadpool will have fun with that line from me. All right, so this episode is the second part of the 3-part season finale. Tolerance is Extinction. But this episode might as well have been called Back to Basics. And any longtime X-Men fan was going crazy this episode, myself included. You're just like, wow! So let me point out some of the really impressive Easter eggs. So first off, Xavier and Magneto retreat to their respective corners, their classic corners. Magneto even bringing back his iconic base, Asteroid M. And the uniforms. Not only has Storm gone back to her original look, reflected in the title card, by the way. I wonder if the title cards next week will all be changed. I wouldn't put it past this show to do it. That seems like a lot of work, but it would be pretty neat. It is the season finale. But every X-Men character, with the exception of Jubilee, who just upgraded to her current look, they all went back to their classic costumes. Roberto even has on his original New Mutants uniform. So that was great. You might have been like, why doesn't his look match the rest? It's because he's from a different team in the comics and a different time period. And Rogue went beyond just going back to her classic look. She also went back to being a villain, and we're going to talk about her more in this breakdown. But the teams, did you catch this? Gold team led by Storm, blue team led by Cyclops, right out of the 90s comics. Look at these incredible trading cards. Plus, one team in a jungle, the other in space. It doesn't get more classic than that when it comes to the X-Men. Then, of course, the piece de resistance, and that's the final shot of Magneto ripping the adamantium from Wolverine's body. Now, you might be like, if you're not a X-Men comic book fan, you might have wondered why the shot got all weird and got kind of static, right? Well, that's because it is an homage to the original artwork from the classic, iconic Fatal Attractions. How's that for a title? Fatal Attractions storyline. I mean, they recreated it, basically. It's the first time they've kind of recreated an exact shot from the comics, but, I mean, what a shot. To the point where they made it seem like the art style changed a little bit, but I mean, again, I wonder if they'll do that classic cover, too. It's pretty, as I said, very iconic. All right, now, in that comic, the trauma of having the adamantium, again, ripped from his body, burns out Wolverine's healing factor, which means he loses that ability for a while. So that's going to suck. But also, give him some very interesting storylines. They go very quickly in this show, though. So I don't know if he'll lose his healing factor for like one episode or if it's going to be like a whole season 2 thing. We'll see. However, in that storyline, he also was like, hey, look, I got bone claws. That was referenced in the X-Men Days of Future Past film as well, and we all were like, oh, it's from the comics. But the reason that Wolverine didn't realize he had bone claws is because, he was in the Weapon X program, which took place after Days of Future Past and Wolverine's own, uninterrupted timeline. And that's where adamantium was bonded to his skeleton, but also his mind was wiped, so that's why he didn't remember that he had bone claws originally. Shortly after, around 2000, they did the Wolverine origin story, the literal origin story, because, they thought the movies, they were racing they were like, the movies are probably going to try and do it, so we better do it in the comics first. And I wonder if they'll do the Wolverine origin and maybe this show. All right, so Wolverine also went into a feral state, sometimes wearing a bandana over the whole top half of his face. And we'll see if that also happens in season 2. If you think he's upset now, wait till he finds out that Jean maybe died again. Again! I don't think she's going to actually die, but she's very close. All right, so let's talk about some of this episode's emotional punches. Sinister is not only waiting for Jean, whose DNA he says he knows intimately after creating Madeline Pryor, but who he's really after is what he sees as his creation, Cable, because Sinister manipulated Cyclops into having a child with the Jean Grey clone that Sinister created. He's obsessed with Cyclops and Jean Grey's DNA and creating a child, and he did. And he's like, come to Papa. And what do you know? Just as Sinister could control Madeline, he can also control Cable. Oh, I didn't see that coming because I don't believe it ever happened in the comics. But it was an interesting choice. Now, earlier this very season, Madeline's love for her son is what broke Sinister's hold over her. But what will break Sinister's hold over Cable, especially since Madeline is dead? Here's my guess, because they've been talking a lot about whether or not Jean is Cable's mom. He's like, you're not my mom. And she's like, yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Even Cyclops was like, it's weird, but kind of. It's just the one you got, Cable. So my guess is that, because, I think Cable will realize that in some ways, many ways, perhaps the ways that count, his mother does live on in Jean. And I think that's what's going to finally break the hold. Jean even says that today, Madeline fights with me. Again, I don't know how Madeline would feel about all this. She was pretty adamant about being her own person, but I guess that's not an option anymore. So she says, I thought quite movingly, today Madeline fights with me against Sinister, which was one of 2 really beautiful moments this episode of women standing together, something we rarely see anywhere, but also in pop culture. Usually women tend to be divided and pitted against each other. And sure enough, Sinister tries to tempt Jean by saying, wouldn't you like to know when I switched you and Madeline? And Jean says, it doesn't matter, because now we are one. And today, again, Madeline fights with me to stand up to Madeline's abuser. It's interesting. It is very powerful, but I think to some degree, I don't know how I feel about the Madeline erasure. All right, the other moment, of course, is with Storm. That was really great. That was beautiful. So well animated as well. And to see these 2 women bonded as sisters, I thought was incredible. I loved it. And I loved their dialogue exchange. Wow, Jean, make them mind your weather, sister. And then Storm replying, make them weather your mind. And you're like, how long have you guys been working on that one? That's incredible. Storm also tells, I can't wait for them to go on a double date. They're both so cute with their couples. All right, so Storm also tells Jean that she has been inspired by Jean's resurrection from the Phoenix Saga, that Jean was able to survive that. And well, here's hoping Jean can do it again, because Jean, about to be killed by Cable, psychically reaches out to Scott to say goodbye again. It is deja vu with how the Phoenix Saga ended before, Jean then came back. But they're giving Wanda and Vision a real run for their money in the Doomed Lovers department. And like that witch and robot, I think that at this point, Jean and Scott realize that it'll always just be a matter of time before they see each other again. Jean at least feels that way, I think. Jean is so powerful, though. I'm surprised she had such a problem with Sinister. I mean, I know Sinister can go into the shadows and stuff, but I'm like, girl, you've been throwing a building around. Let's go. Cable, though, of course, is a more formidable opponent. But this is Jean freaking Grey. Maybe having to battle in a miniskirt is holding her back a little bit. So that's the only costume I don't like. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. But you know why Jean always wins? She's always got a little Phoenix Force up her sleeve. And I gotta say, I wouldn't be surprised if that's her trump card here against Cable, if she's willing to use it, because of course she's already there. She already thinks of him as her son. So I think it's gonna be a combo. I think it's gonna be part Phoenix Force, to push Cable back a little bit, and then Cable acknowledging Jean as his other mother. So I think that's what we're going to end up with next week. I don't quite understand why Cyclops felt he needed to stop Xavier from controlling Magneto to buy Jean more time. I'm like, I don't think that would have affected it. I mean, and also, that was wrapping up pretty quickly over there. Maybe he was just looking for an opportunity to blast Xavier. I told you beforehand in the comics that Scott eventually does split from Xavier, at least for a little while. In fact, he kills him. But don't worry, it's comics, it's a soap opera. Everybody comes back. But we do seem to be headed a little bit in that direction. Maybe, again, in season 2 of Scott finally breaking away. More theories about Xavier and Scott in a moment. I'm very proud of the one that I have coming up. But first, Xavier, maybe he should have stayed with his bird queen. Because Xavier's like, everybody's mean to me and my girlfriend. But anyway, he's like, because nobody wants to be his pal here, even while wearing his cute little driving gloves. I like his little war outfit. I did also like his astral plane meeting with President Kelly. Visually, I thought that was a really nice mix of reality and, the astral plane. I would have liked to have seen both of them where they actually were. And maybe it would have been even cooler if it was like a mix of the two rooms that they were in, like blended together. That would have been nice too. But maybe a little harder to get across. The Oval Office and space is very effective. I like that. Speaking of, reality and mentality, so speaking of Y words, technopathy doesn't quite roll off the tongue like telepathy does, but Bastion sure is powerful with it. He can mentally control an army of giant sentinels and also make a little arm out of cables, which I kind of liked. Oh, cable, right? Yeah. But anyway, the huge sentinels are even able to get the better of an Omega-level mutant like Storm. So again, very, very powerful. Forge came up with an inhibitor crown, which was based on the technology used to temporarily shut down Jean's telepathy, so technopathy and telepathy, that was used when she was, gone mad with the Phoenix Force. And Forge and Beast get drunk on science, and they're like, we could even permanently shut down Bastion. But after what Storm went through, losing her own powers, which she thought was permanent, well, it turns out she wouldn't wish it on her worst enemy. Xavier was going to puppet Magneto's ass to take down Bastion, but that didn't work out. But I do believe, very violent too, by the way. I guess you could argue because, you would think Xavier would make it as comfortable as possible. But I do believe in the end it'll be up to Forge to take down Bastion. Machine Man versus Machine Man. They were also in a photo together. I don't know why nobody's talking about the fact that these two guys know each other. Speaking of Bastion, on Xavier's huge list of things I should have told people, although Forge has his own list as well. Turns out Xavier knew about Bastion and tried to recruit him when he was a child, thinking that Bastion was a mutant who could talk to machines. As Storm says, Bastion very well could have been in that original class photo if his mom hadn't slammed the door in Xavier's face. I'm surprised Xavier would just walk away from powerful mutants and be like, I'm just going to assume it all goes to plan. Like a mutant, though, Bastion does find relief in a world with no power when the power has been turned off because there are no more machines for him to hear. Very similar to Jean being, constantly, inundated by telepathy, people's thoughts. But speaking of things that have been turned off, his mom's been turned off. However, she can cry, which I thought was a very disturbing image. I was like, wow, what an evil dude. By the way, Trish is also on life support. Can the humanity of the Prime Sentinels be salvaged? Magneto don't care, because as he says, I don't see anyone trying to salvage any of the lives lost on Genosha, thank you very much. There's a lot of talk this episode about whether or not Xavier was right to hand his dream over to Magneto, whether or not that was a good idea. And to me, the most moving dialogue about this was Magneto talking about his pain and guilt of selling Xavier's dream only for that to lead to some mutant's deaths, like Leech. He's like, I sold him a bill of goods thanks to you, Xavier. How does Xavier escape that same guilt? Well, of course he feels it a little bit, but why is it less for him? Well, I think it's because Xavier truly believes in his dream, but Magneto never did. He didn't believe in what he was selling. What is Magneto's dream? A world thrown back into the Stone Age with the Earth's magnetic fields badly damaged as Storm reports? Magneto has no dream. He has a nightmare. Xavier wants to lift everyone up, and Magneto wants to pull everyone down. And if those are the only two choices, then yeah, I guess I got to keep siding with Xavier. I did really like Xavier telling Magneto, as I said in the beginning, that instead of ruling the world, Magneto was letting the world rule him. That's what he means about Magneto is all reaction. He's just throwing a temper tantrum. He's letting the world dictate his emotions and his decisions and his actions. But that led Magneto, as I said, to tell Xavier to shut up because, that is basically saying that all Xavier does is talk. Now because that's not totally, the X-Men act. So I think that's why Xavier is so dependent on Scott. Magneto is a one-man operation, but Xavier, of course, has his students, and first and foremost, Scott Summers. Scott is the one who acts, right? Scott, by the way, is the one who tells, even though he's angry with Xavier himself, he tells everyone else publicly to drop it because it's time to focus on the mission at hand. But Scott is a short-term thinker, and Xavier plays the long game. And that's interesting. So, I really think that's what makes them such an effective team. And I never thought of them that way before this episode. I've read a ton of X-Men comics and seen a ton of X-Men stories. And this is the first time that symbiotic relationship has occurred to me. Scott is very unhappy. He's always unhappy. Scott's not a happy guy. But maybe that's because he doesn't accept that he's a number 2. He always thinks of himself as a number 1. I think because, I think maybe he just would prefer Xavier to be like this kindly teacher that just is in the background. But I think that if Scott realized that he was like the first mate, it's not his ship, but he's not, number 2's not bad. There's a whole lot of people in the X-Men. Being number 2 out of the whole group, I think is solid. But they're losing some numbers though, because not everyone is happy with Xavier and Scott's leadership. Rogue gives herself away. Nightcrawler's like, someone's still alive. And she's like, Remy? And then he's like, no. So it's a good thing they had that conversation in private. She's really mourning Remy. She even puts on his trench coat. She's in mourning, even though it's very unflattering. I'm like, maybe find a belt somewhere, Rogue? Thankfully, she does not keep the trench coat on. But in the end, she'll take the man who is still alive, and she ends up joining Magneto. Shades of when they were together in Age of Apocalypse, also that storyline, that alternate universe storyline. But then they were still fighting it for Xavier's dream there. I was very surprised, though, that Roberto joined Magneto. Something about sticking it to his mom. It's like he's been so passive this whole series. Now he decides to be evil? It didn't really work for me. I guess it's a reference to how in the comics, much later on, he briefly was with the Hellfire Club. They've had a hard time in the comics finding something for Roberto to do. Besides being a founding member of the New Mutants, he doesn't have a ton of storylines to draw from. Which is good for this show because they can kind of then define him, just like they're doing some really exciting stuff with Jubilee. But Roberto, who has always been, for the most part, a really good guy. He's still even a good guy here. Like when he's fighting Jubilee, his heart's not in it. Their powers look so beautiful together. They're quite the pair. But evil just doesn't look good on Roberto. It just doesn't fit. Finally, last couple of notes for this episode. Wolverine tries to take out Magneto. Did he succeed? I don't know what Wolverine was trying to say there. The brave ones die first. I'm like, what are you saying about your own team, man? I'd be like, thanks. Just leave the witty repartee to everybody else, Wolverine. You just slice and dice. Do I think that he ultimately killed Magneto and Magneto just, ripped out Wolverine's adamantium before he died? I don't think so. Just like I don't think Jean will die again either. But I do think that both Magneto and Wolverine will have to lick their wounds and might have been potentially taken off the board for the final episode of the season. And Xavier is also possibly off the board. Magneto's helmet now stuck on his head, which blocks telepathy. In or out. So, sucks for Xavier. Will Bastion step front and center in the final episode as the main villain? Right now, so far, he's done a Zemo, getting our heroes to fight themselves. And as we saw from Civil War, that is very effective. All right, so that's my breakdown of X-Men 97, Episode 9. One more episode to go this season, but we already have a Season 2 coming for sure, and they're working on Season 3 as we speak. So a lot of X-Men 97 in our future. So with just one more episode left for this season, what do you think and hope is going to happen? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.